question, which is the non-HDL cholesterol. What is the value of measuring it by Professor Ahmed Tag? I think now to start the discussion, I'd like to start with Dr. Saif. Saif, to use the non-HDL cholesterol.
The LDL is more important because this is the target. The non-HDL, it's measurable from all the other parameters, which we sometimes we forget it. The very low density lipoprotein and others. So we have to target on the LDL. I think so.
Who will use, Dr. Reda, the non-HDL cholesterol as a target? Which pattern of patient, which profile of patient you use?
كان بس السؤال الأول كده after the introduction of IVAS البلاك ريجريشن يمكن اتغيرت الفكرة عنها كتير. في الايفاس الفيرتشوال هيستولوجي اللي بيشوف الكونستيتيوشن او الاستراكشر اوف ذا بلاك بيحدد لنا هو حصل الستابلايزيشن للبلاك ولا لا، يعني ما عندناش بنعتمد على السايز اوف بلاك او على الانتما ميديا سيكنس علشان نقول حصل ريجريشن ولا لا. في الفيرتشوال هيستولوجي يقول لنا مثلا البلاك دي الكاب بتاعها قل ولا ما قلش، بقت مور كالسيفايد ولا لا، بقت مور فايبرس ولا لا. فالفكره الجديده في الفيرتشوال هيستولوجي ده اللي احنا بنستخدمها كلها في الايفاس، حتى احنا عندنا رغم ان احنا يعني لسه بادئين عملنا استادي على حوالي 50 عيان بنشوف النون كالبريت ليجن في الاكيوت كورونري سندروم وبنتابعه. لقينا ان الفيرتشوال هيستولوجي ده البشائر الاولانيه يعني بيقول لنا ان حصل استابلايزيشن للبلاك ولا لا، وحصل ريجريشن للبلاك ولا لا، والريسك قلت ولا لا لما استخدمنا الايفاس بالفيرتشوال تكنولوجي.
Dr. Shady, what do you think about the non-HDL? It should be a target for a profiles of patients?
Actually, non-HDL cholesterol started as a good target عشان نخرج بره ان ال LDL هو التارجت، لان بعض الناس بيبقى عندها other pathology like triglycerides والاثيروجينيك افكت بتاعه اللايبوبروتين ليتل A ال VLDL. بس معظم الترايلز اللي اتعملت على النون اتش دي ال كوليسترول كتارجت كانت الليميتيشن بتاعتها ان هم في الاخر بيقولوا ان انا اشتغلت على جنرال بوبيوليشن، فبالتالي انا مش عارف الدواء اللي قلل النون اتش دي ال كوليسترول في سبيسيفيك ليبيد ديس اوردر زي مثلا الترايجليسرايد العالي هيبقى افكتيف ولا لا، لو ال دي عالي هيبقى افكتيف ولا لا. فاعتقد ان ده ليميتيشن للنون اتش دي ال كوليسترول.
Professor Amin, do you think that in diabetic patient it is deceiving to take the LDL target as only target for controlling those patients?
Definitely, especially if the patient has a very high hypertriglyceridemia. In the setting of hypertriglyceridemia, the measurement of the LDL is a calculation, not reflecting the true LDL cholesterol. Especially, we know that the LDL has two types: small dense LDL, which is a very risky part, and large dense LDL, which is less injurious or less atherogenic. When the triglycerides are large, this means the triglycerides component of the LDL has been taken, and then the LDL, even though the number is not that large, but it is very atherogenic. So I think the LDL should be taken in the view of the hypertriglyceridemia in diabetic patients.
Dr. Yasser, then Dr. Salim, you would like to comment?
When we reach the target, the patient, I cannot even protect my patient, even the patient has a second attack of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, even if reaches the target of LDL. So this is another issues for performing the atherosclerotic process like lipoprotein A, like triglyceridemia, and lipoprotein A, unfortunately, not down by the lifestyle modification or some statin. So it is a very important issue.
لو اتكلمنا على الديسليبيديميك ريسك او الميتابوليك ريسك يبقى احنا بنتكلم على النون اتش دي ال and some believes that ان بتدي جلوبال اسسمنت للريسك اكتر من ال دي ال. ليه؟ لان احنا لو شلنا الاتش دي ال من التوتال كوليسترول، انا ما بتكلمش على ال دي ال بس، بتكلم على ال دي ال، بتكلم على كل ترايجليسرايد ريتش بارتكلز، بتكلم على الفيري لو دنسيتي، بتكلم على الانترميديت انترميديت دنسيتي. وبالتالي المسؤول الاساسي عن الريزيديوال ريسك هو النون اتش دي ال. ده نمبر 1. نمبر 2 ان شورت، لاول مره في الجايد لاينز الاخيره نزلت وليها رقم، المفروض ان هو تقريبا حوالي 30 مللي جرامز above التارجت بتاع ال دي ال. يعني لو ال دي ال 70 المفروض ان هي تكون اقل من 100. ف it's very important but still we need more evidence. I think we can hear more from Professor
انت
Tag.
قلت كل حاجه يا باشا، ده انا همشي دي خلاص.
Now the wrap up and the evidence of the answers.
اخت مينوتن 8 دقايق.
Okay.
أنا بقول لك. اوكي، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. طبعا بشكر الاستاذ الدكتور سيد فرج اخي وصديقي for this invitation and Professor Ashraf Rida for this interesting EAVA meeting. So non-HDL, does it matter? What's the value of measuring it? وبسرعة بقى هقول thank you مرة تانية. This diagram represents the serious killers worldwide, and on the top, cardiovascular disease. And at the heart of cardiovascular disease is coronary artery disease. And this is why we are here discussing different metabolic risk and non-metabolic risk even though. And this is the major process by which coronary artery disease eventually happening and ending up with coronary artery disease, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, including cerebral, peripheral, and coronaries as well. This is very important slide representing that it's not the number, it's the patient. So 140 milligram LGL might be okay for some patients, but for البوينتر مش شغال. لو خدنا يعني زي اسقاط افقي كده على 140 هنجد في الناس اللي ما عندهاش اي كارديوفاسكولار اور دايابيتس ديزيز ممكن الريسك في كارديوفاسكولار ديث يبقى اقل من 5%، في حين لو طلعنا فوق خالص عند الكوروناري ارتري ديزيز والدايابيتس الريسك بيعلى عن كده كتير. This is the non-HDL. It's all particles of the lipid components except the HDL, and you can realize clearly that the triglycerides component is very high, and as just mentioned by my colleague and friend Professor Mohammed Salim, that it contains high amounts of triglycerides as well. No doubt that there is a relationship between LDL and coronary artery disease. Reduction of LDL ends up with reduction of coronary artery disease. However, there is still a risk for developing coronary artery disease even in presence of low LDL. We have many trials that have reduced LDL. However, there is still a residual risk of cardiovascular disease. We have many trials, including 4S trial, even other lipid trials. They all explained that even in patients with LDL less than 70 milligram per deciliter, there is still a risk of coronary artery disease. Of course, it's not comparable to placebo, but there is still a high risk, which might, in some patients group, leads up to about 18%. This is very important diagram. And if you can clearly see here, that LDL targets are different. Why? Why it's ongoingly, we can get it low and low from less than 100, less than 70, less than 55, and even less than 40 in some patients, because still there is a risk of cardiovascular disease in those patients, especially with coronary artery disease, even with low LDL. So residual risk and what's beyond that in CARE trials, even after LDL reduction with 40 milligram pravastatin, there is a residual risk of 10% versus 13 in placebo. In HBS study, still 14 versus 18. In IMPROVE trial, one of the most important proving evidence for management of LDL, reduce the risk of coronary artery disease, but not eradicate the risk of coronary artery disease. And this is simply because of the non-HDL. This paper has been published in the Lancet, and this is very important diagram. This is the whole story. It's about more than 500,000 population, more than 500,000. And you can clearly see that non-HDL cholesterol, and this was actually over 19 countries, about 4 continents, so it's a mega trial, explaining that the higher the non-HDL, the higher the risk of coronary artery disease, even with low LDL. This is very important. And this was published 2019. Maybe because of this and other important papers, we have that non-HDL should be measured in patients with coronary artery disease and in patients even for primary prevention. And the target of LDL is mobile. It's less than 85 milligram per deciliter in very high-risk patients, less than 100 milligram per deciliter in high-risk patients, as less than 130 milligram in moderate cardiovascular risk. So it's a class 1 indication to measure the non-HDL. Simply non-HDL equals total cholesterol minus HDL. This is another shocking trial, and this was published recently, 2021 in JACC. And this explains, I have to come here, please, explains that, look here, with high LDL, low non-HDL, no increased risk of mortality or MI. However, if we have low HDL and elevated either non-HDL or ApoB, still we have about 20% risk of MI and about 48% risk of coronary artery disease and risk of myocardial infarction. If we have both elevated non-HDL and the ApoB, the risk increased and jumped to 80% as regarding MI and 23% risk of mortality in patients even with low LDL. So this is very important as well. So my take-home message, coronary artery disease is a major cause of death worldwide. We have to take care of the guidelines that we have to measure. Sorry? يلي يعمل كده. ده أنا حتى ما خدت 6 دقايق يا راجل. لا والله. لا والله. So this is important part of the guidelines and management of this lipidemia, and you can clearly see that non-HDL measurement is very important. And finally, this is the more important, even more than non-HDL or even LDL. 10 ways to avoid heart disease: exercise, alcohol cessation, smoking cessation, some meditation and exercise. And thank you very much. Shukran.
Thank you as usual, Professor Ahmed.